New renderings of the proposed new Titan Stadium were released today.
Future home of the Buffalo Bills. About
$2.1 billion price tag.
Taxpayer dollars towards stadiums.
Most people here in the Valley are against using any public money to help fund the proposed stadium.
The stadium doesn't seem like it's going to fall down.
This is Charles Ebbets. By 1909, he had become the sole owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he wanted to give them a new, modern home. Not like the wooden parks they had been playing in, because sometimes those burned down. He decided to build a steel stadium. Ebbets took $750,000 of his own money and paid for this ballpark to be built, Ebbets Field. In 1912, they broke ground, and this stadium by Prospect Park would be the home of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Now in 1951, the commissioner of baseball, this guy Ford Frick, basically said, hey, we bring in all this money for these cities, we create jobs, we're doing these cities a favor by existing, they should reciprocate. This is when the cost of building these stadiums really started shifting from the sports franchise to the city that hosts the franchise. So the Dodgers had been playing at Ebbets Field since 1913, and by the 1950s, Walter O'Malley was the owner of the team. By this point, the Dodgers were one of the most profitable teams in baseball. O'Malley wanted to build a new stadium at the Atlantic Yards in Brooklyn, and he began threatening to move to LA if the city didn't acquiesce. Now it's worth noting that moving cities wasn't really a thing at the time. Until 1953, no Major League Baseball team had moved. The first were the Boston Braves in 1953, who had wanted to leave Boston because they were having trouble building a fan base and couldn't fill their stadium. Plus, Milwaukee gave them a stadium using public money. In 54, the St. Louis Browns became the Baltimore Orioles. 55, the Philly Athletics became the Kansas City Athletics. But officials were unmoved by the Dodgers' threats. As the mayor said, we don't intend to allow ourselves to be blackjacked into helping either the Dodgers or Giants financially. The New York Giants also wanted a new stadium. One congressman said, let the Dodgers move to Los Angeles if the alternative is to succumb to an arrogant demand to spend the taxpayers' money to build a stadium for them in Brooklyn. Plus, the city had already spent $110,000 on studying the proposed site of the new stadium. And a new stadium probably would have meant extensive use of eminent domain to clear the space. This is exactly what happened 50 years later when they started working on the Barclays Center, which is exactly where they had proposed putting a field for the Dodgers. The new Dodger Stadium in LA would also negatively impact residents, and that's where they've been since 1958. But this would mark a new era where professional sports teams would threaten to pull out of cities unless they got a new stadium, which coincides with a new era of public funding for private stadiums. Let's take the NFL as an example. Out of 32 teams, 27 use stadiums that were subsidized by taxpayers. These 5 teams play in stadiums that were privately funded, but the rest had help from the public. And for the 2026 season, the Titans and the Bills are getting new stadiums entirely, both with the aid of public financing. In the case of the Bills, people fear that they might move to San Diego if they weren't given a new stadium. And San Diego is in need of a team because the Chargers moved from San Diego to LA because they got a new stadium there. But the Bills got their stadium, and New York citizens are going to contribute $1 billion to it. The new Titan Stadium is projected to cost $1.2 billion for taxpayers. Psychotically, stadiums are considered to have hit middle age at about 20 years old. So if teams aren't working on acquiring whole new stadiums, they're working on $100 million plus repairs and upgrades. Governor Tony Evers would allocate $290 million from the state's surplus towards upgrades to American Family Field in exchange for the Milwaukee Brewers extending their lease at the stadium through 2043. This is when all the teams moved into their stadiums. And these teams are all set to get these expensive renovations and repairs, some of which will be supported by taxpayers. The Saints actually received $27 million in pandemic aid for their recent renovations. But this is all in service to attracting or keeping a team. This is also a thing in lower levels of sports. The early 2000s in New Jersey saw a bunch of minor league baseball stadiums go up. One was Campbell's Field in Camden. It cost taxpayers $18 million. The team that played there was the River Sharks. The River Sharks and Campbell's Field were supposed to revitalize the impoverished city by being the centerpiece of an economic development plan along the edge of the Delaware River. Actually, economic development is always the justification for publicly funding these stadiums. The idea being that if teams are here, as the former commissioner of baseball asserted, the local economy gets a boost. But things like naming rights, concessions, ticket sales, all the things that really generate money, there's not really any profit sharing between the team and the host city. In exchange for naming the stadium where the Panthers play Bank of America Stadium, Bank of America is paying the Panthers $140 million. But the state doesn't get any of that. Or take concessions. Stadiums make as much as $2 million per game on concessions, but none of that goes to the city. So the economic boost comes from construction of the stadium, hotel stays, traffic driven to the area. But in reality, decades of academic studies consistently find no discernible positive relationship between sports facilities and local economic development, income growth, or job creation. So it's very unlikely that a sports team is going to boost your local economy, especially if you've made an investment in a team and they decide to leave anyway. In 1995, St. Louis put $280 million into a stadium for the Rams. And when the Rams decided to move to LA, taxpayers still owed more than $100 million in debt on the bonds used to finance the Edward Jones Dome, where the Rams played. There are several examples of taxpayers having to pay for stadiums after the team has stopped using them. The River Sharks, who played at Campbell's Field in Camden, moved to Connecticut, so taxpayers were then on the hook for $1 million to tear the stadium down. The old Giant Stadium, demolished to make way for new Meadowlands Stadium, left New Jersey with a debt of $110 million. Seattle's King County had debt over $80 million for the King Dome, which was raised in 2000. And here's the other thing. Voters don't want to pay for your dumb stadium. Sometimes they do, in the case of the Broncos Stadium, where 51% of voters approved the stadium proposals, but sometimes they don't. San Diego voters overwhelmingly defeated a new downtown stadium plan for the San Diego Chargers. Ballot Measure C in San Diego asked voters whether they wanted to effectively increase the city's hotel room tax rate from 12.5% to 16.5%, with the proceeds helping fund a new $1.8 billion stadium and convention center. They did not, and so the Chargers moved to LA. But often, they aren't given a say at all. For the new Bills and Titans stadiums, voters weren't consulted. However, an after-the-fact poll of New York State voters found that they opposed the Bills deal by a whopping margin of 63% to 24%, with opposition consistent across both parties and all parts of the state. A poll by a Nashville community group of residents of the neighborhood where a new Titan Stadium would be built found 90% opposed to taxpayer funding of the project. So if your city is considering paying for a new stadium, it likely won't be the economic windfall they're telling you it will be. Now, maybe that doesn't matter to you. You would vote for the stadium anyway. Either way, the citizenry should probably be allowed to have a say. And regardless of how badly you want that stadium, it should be understood that no major sports team needs subsidies. You're not voting on whether you want to keep a team or improve a stadium. You're voting on whether or not to acquiesce to the whims of an extremely wealthy team owner. And that will do it for me. If you found this video interesting, make sure you are subscribed to Breaking Points, of course. You can also check out my YouTube channel where I talk about media and politics and other interesting things. Link in description. Liking and sharing always helps. Please do that. Thank you to Breaking Points. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.